Morning, everyone. Welcome to our live Q&A call. Today, Barry and I are going to talk a little bit about handling objections, but more importantly, we want to really talk about how to overcome getting asked objections, right? So if we can figure out how to answer their questions, we're going to minimize the objections right up front. And the challenge here is really doing your needs analysis, making sure you're on target for what people are looking for. But before we jump in, I want to take a moment to introduce myself. I'm Steve Porcaro. Welcome. Barry, would you like to say hi before we jump into our housekeeping?
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. Hopefully you'll get lots of great pearls out of our conversation this morning.
Okay, so Barry's already throwing the gauntlet down, right? Already going to be a great call. So over the next few minutes, as people are getting on the call, we're going to take a moment to go over some housekeeping tips. We have some questions that were sent in during the week from our last call, and then we'll jump into our topic. Also, planning for our upcoming phone calls, one of the things that we'd like to do is focus more on your questions, and we're thinking of adjusting our timing to help people jump on this call, make it more of a lunch and learn, being able to allow people to jump on around lunchtime. Based on your feedback over the last month or so, we're going to move this call probably 2 hours forward to 1 p.m. Eastern time. Just keep an eye on that announcement. Secondly, we'll be taking calls, and we want this call to be about you and what you need to help you increase the success in your life and or business. So again, this call is all about how we can help you. So quick housekeeping note, if you get on the call and you're on the phone, we're going to go around and ask people who would like to ask a question. *6 will mute or unmute yourself. Also, if you're on video whether you're on the phone or on video, and if you're in a noisy environment, please mute yourself. Sometimes that little extra noise comes in and it does interfere with people when we're talking and trying to share information, so thank you for that. Secondly, if you have to jump off, no problem. We'll be sharing the recording in the next day or so. That way, if you submit a question and you can't stay live, you'll be able to hear the answer with the recording going forward. Barry, can you share some tips about sending messages through the chat box, please?
Sure. If you are on your computer or your phone, there is a little icon at the bottom of your screen that says chat. You just click on that and you'll see a window pop up to the right-hand side, and you'll be able to select either everyone or privately to us as the hosts of the program. You can just toggle that, type your message there, and we will see it and take care of it for you.
All right, thank you, Barry. So going forward, again, this call is all about how we can help you. We'll take your questions live, but we'll also take questions emailed. If you know you can't make the call and you'd like us to address something, we'll definitely throw that on the list and we'll work our way through the list. But at the end of the day, we want to engage and really be live with you to help you at the moment, right? So we're trying to figure out the best time for most people. And at the moment, Tuesday was a pretty decent day for most people, so we'll see what happens. This is our first call going into November. The clocks, it's funny, the clocks get set back and everyone goes crazy. Just the other night, I was coming home and it felt like it was 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, and I looked, it was 5:15, and I felt like I was in a time warp. And usually takes a couple days to get back in the swing of things. So I know I'm feeling a little behind the weather as we jump in. All right, so let's jump in with our questions. And one of the first questions, we got this a few days ago about, say, what's an objection? And the interesting part is there are all types of objections that people raise, right? We talk about price being a main one, service, quality, color, all types, depending on your product and your service. But here's an interesting question. What happens when someone says they want to see you for a meeting and, yeah, Steve, make a meeting, come to my office, but then when you try to follow up, they don't make a meeting, they don't schedule a meeting with you? Is that an objection? Maybe not by the typical sense of the definition or a typical definition, but it's also a message that they're not ready to meet with you. So on one hand, it's really hard to overcome objections if you can't get in front of this person. So I want to step back a little bit and talk about how to get past the gatekeeper, getting in front of people, especially if they ask you to come back. The interesting thing is, and a lot of us here have been in that situation where people would say, oh, sure, Steve, I'm being polite, come back, make an appointment. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you in a month. Or more importantly, how about the first of the year after the holidays? And you look down and you say, sure, that's 3 months away, 2 months away. If it's that important to you, if it's that worthwhile, why are we waiting? So the question came via email. How do I schedule that appointment when the physician, and this happens to be a physician's office, is keeping me at arm's length? And that's a good question that's come up. And I know many of you, and again, we've all been there. If you're calling on physicians' offices, professionals, just about any business, it does happen from time to time. But the big question is it a legitimate issue, or is it something that they're doing just to hold you outside? I do know sometimes the office staff are short-staffed, right? Sometimes you may have a small group of physicians, one person's on leave. Maybe I had one group of physicians where he was serving in the military. He got called to active duty. So instead of 5 physicians in the office, they were down to 4. They all had to cover. That was a legitimate concern. They didn't have time. But bearing some type of emergency going on and somebody wants to see you, what do you do to schedule that appointment? So one of the things that worked well, I'm going to let Bari chime in here because she called on a lot of practices, but physicians' offices, one of the things I did was develop a relationship with the head person in the office and try to really get an idea of when their schedule would allow me. Especially the perfect example. Hey, Steve, can you come in and see me in the next few weeks? I'd love to talk to you about your new product. I'm like, okay. So I'd call the office and the girl on the phone or the scheduling person would say, oh, there's no time in the books. And after a couple times, I actually had to go in person. This was a key account. I met with the person that I developed a relationship with, and I said, Sonia, Dr. So-and-so would like to see me. Is there any way you can squeeze me in either in the morning before patients or some afternoon when he's done? Knowing full well that they always run late, especially with surgeons, right? They're working in the operating room, patients run over. But if I can get there early, sometimes early, 6:30, 7, depending on his schedule, I can go in and have coffee with the staff. I can bring in, some information. I can be there to head them off in the staff. But I like to take a proactive approach. And one of the things I did was develop a relationship. So I had my finger on the pulse of what was happening in the offices. So Bari, would you be able to share, because I know you mentioned in the past you did some similar things. What worked well for you when you were calling on physicians' offices?
There's one example in particular that I think illustrates the plus side of making relationships with people in the office other than the physician. I had a practice that I inherited when I was with a new company, and I was warned the only notes in Salesforce were that it was a hostile account and dormant and hostile. Fun, right? So the first thing I did was call the practice to try and get in there. And I got the name of the administrator. And of course, every time I called the first 3 or 4 times, would you like her voicemail? Would you like her voicemail? And the first couple of times I just left my name and phone number. Then I said, okay, that tactic didn't work. And I know it can take between 9 and 12 touches to break through. So I knew not to give up. So subsequently, I left a message for the practice administrator, and instead of just leaving my name and phone number, I said, you know, I'm the new representative for the account. I know your account has been unhappy in the past and I'd like to discuss it with you. Could you please call me? That finally got a response. So we had a nice chat on the phone and I let her talk and tell me, you know, what their experience had been. And at that point, she said, you know what, I like you. Let's continue this in person. And she granted me a meeting with her in person. So I, you know, according to her schedule, I let her pick it. I wasn't going to try and, you know, ramrod my schedule down her throat. Went in for that meeting. And she said, yes, she goes, I think you've got some great ideas and I can tell that you mean, you want to help. So I'm going to have you meet with the doctor, but his schedule's very busy. I said, no problem. Again, let her schedule the meeting because this wasn't urgent. The practice was dormant and hostile. My goal, my only goal at that point wasn't even to get them reawakened. It was just to get them to put the gun down. So I finally, 3 months later, she gave me an appointment 3 months in advance. I had to wait. And because I knew that she trusted me at that point, I wasn't going to bombard her or bother her. I just let it go. And she did need to call me and reschedule it once, but once it was rescheduled, it stuck. And I was able to get in and meet with her and the doctor. And part of what happened in that meeting was I let him talk. I didn't sit there and try to sell the features and benefits of my product. I let him tell me why he had purchased the product to begin with. And that got him off the topic of being unhappy with whatever he was unhappy with and back onto envisioning what the reasoning behind his original purchase was to focus on what we could do for him without me having to tell him. He said his piece and he left, and then the administrator and I were able to flesh out a plan to pretty much start from scratch. So there you go.
Yep, thank you, Barry. And for those of you who don't know, Barry would go in and as a practice manager, help physicians' offices after they purchase the product implement some of the new technology. So sometimes some of her customers had buyer's remorse, and she had to go in and reinforce the benefits, the value of the product again. And again, is that an objection? It is, but their action is an objection in a sense. So she had to overcome that. And the funny thing is reminding people the value of why they bought that product or service in the first place is really a great place to start. And I think it happens with everybody. We do this all the time with technology and products that we buy personally and professionally, but our customers sometimes are overwhelmed. And, you know, Barry brings up a good point. 3 months later for an appointment, that's really hard to fathom, thinking about this was something that the physician wanted so urgently, and yet you're waiting 90 days, 2 months, 3 months. So to remind that, and sometimes things happen. Again, people are on vacation, they're covering call for the next 5 weekends. People are out or in the office, that's fine. But what can we do to meet them halfway? So the interesting thing is, and we're working our way there to the objection part, because I don't want to spend time on basic salesmanship about how to overcome. There's a lot of different processes and methods out there that work depending on the type of product. You know, the feel, felt, and process, right? How do you 5-step process? How do you overcome that basic objection? I think the best way to think about this, for a lot of what we do, it gets back to educating our customers on what we offer. And if you think about education as a tool, and I think many of us who are in the service industry, healthcare, technology, our products, our services are very technical at some point. So there's a huge learning curve. So not only do we have to teach the operating room staff, the office staff, the physician assistant, the nurse practitioner, depending on if they're in the hospital or in the office, but also the residents. Sometimes the new residents who are coming on if you're in a teaching university. Excuse me. So the educational component is everything we do all the time. And to be honest, there are times when I've met with people and assumed they knew what our product could do. Because, oh, well, I sent them the email, I left them the literature, I sent them the link to the video, they should know all about it. But that's like the tip of the iceberg. And, Barry brought up a good point is once we start this discussion, we really need to uncover what's holding them back. Right up front, people always say it's the cost, but that's a knee-jerk reaction. And here's a simple proof when you think about this. Think about the last time you went out for dinner, for a meal, and the wait person, I don't know what they're called now, the wait person, comes over and asks you how your meal is. Other than you having a mouthful of food, our automatic response is, it's fine, it's good. On occasion, you may say it's cold, it's hot, it's raw, it's not, what we want. But 9 times out of 10, we're going to say, oh yeah, everything's fine. Just because we don't want to go down that battle, we don't want to confront, or we don't want to share information, or we're in a hurry and we need to eat and go. So a lot of times when we're dealing with people, and if there is an objection, what the easiest one is, it costs too much, or we're already using a competitor, or we don't want to use this new technology because we're happy with what we have. If you do your market research, your analysis, your competitive analysis, you're going to be well prepared on how to overcome that. And I think one of the big takeaways is do your homework. Every product out there has a good target audience, but timing is everything. I know when we go out there and we sell services to hospitals, physicians, you're going to have your early adopters. You're going to have people who are going to wait till it's out there and well established. It may be a year or two. You have people who are waiting for third-party validation, right? They want to see the Harvard, the Yale, the Dartmouth. They want to see some of the big teaching universities come over here and give it their blessing and say, yes, I'm going to use it. Ideally, there are so many objections, it's really hard to say what are the big ones that you're running into. But again, other than price, what are some of the objections that people have run into on a regular basis? And again, via email, the biggest thing I got is, well, my hospital has a contract and I can't use products outside the contract unless it's an emergency. And that is a tough one. If you're going after an account that has a contract with another vendor, that might not be the best target for you. And that's a tough one to overcome unless it's something that you have that's so unique that it falls outside the contract limitations. But I think the bigger thing, getting back to our earlier point, is what happens when you can't get past the gatekeeper or they're dragging their heels? To me, actions speak louder than words. If they're very excited about your product, and this happened recently, I was with a client, we were at a trade show, they walked into the booth, they basically jumped up and down and said, I want the demo model, send it to my office, I want it next week, I'm going to go take this and spread the word for you. So it was interesting where that person self-appointed themselves a champion just because they could see the value and the benefit it would be for their patients and clients. On the other hand, if someone doesn't see the value, we don't know unless we ask them. So when we're talking about objections, we need to figure out what's holding them back. if they're willing and if they have time to share that with you. And I think having a conversation, if possible, I know the funny part is, and I know Bari wants to share some insight on this, is when we start going into our sales approach, our close, our presentation, we need to give time for the objections to come up, and we need to welcome that. If we're giving notice that we don't want to handle objections and we're going to gloss over that, the message is you don't care about my concerns. You're selling versus letting me buy. So I'm going to pass it over to Bari because I think she has a vital point to make.
Yes, this goes back to when I was working in private practice as marketing director and patient counselor. It was a premium LASIK practice. And we could usually get without prejudging patients, based on their interaction with the doctor would let us know, what procedure the patient was a candidate for, and then I would go in and talk to them. One of the things that I always did was to review the entire intake form before I go in to talk to the patient so that I can get a sense of who they are, whether it's what they do, whether they have a family, or what their hobbies are, or what they hope to get out of their consultation. And most of the time, everything was pretty standard, but once there was a patient who seemed very skittish once he found out he was a candidate for something other than what he originally came in to be consulted about. And upon reading his intake form, I saw that he was an aficionado of scuba diving and snorkeling. And the doctor had told me, he seems pretty skittish, so, see what you can do when you go in there. So to Steve's point, I let the guy tell me what he was worried about and why he was nervous or hesitant to move forward. And once he basically came out and said it's just too expensive, I knew that he didn't see the value in the premium price point of our options. So I took that intake form and I used that information to inform my discussion with him. And I said, oh, well, I see that you love scuba diving and snorkeling and you don't wear contact lenses, you only wear glasses. He said, yeah. I said, well, wouldn't it be nice to be able to just get an off-the-shelf snorkeling mask or a scuba diving mask and just jump in the water and actually be able to see? And his eyes lit up and that light bulb went off for him. So instead of wasting hours and hours and hours talking about the features of our laser and the processes for getting to that point, I honed in on that one thing that I knew would be of value to him. And sometimes it's looking for those little details before you launch into your pitch that make the difference. Because if you're spouting features and all they care about is benefits, you're going to fall on deaf ears. So overcoming those objections, especially when it comes to price, that's usually a hidden objection. And it's not always value. In this case, it was value because this guy would probably spend thousands of dollars on vacations and be worried about his prescription lens on his snorkeling mask fogging up or cracking or whatever. So once he understood that this meant that he could participate in one of his biggest hobbies completely unfettered, it was a done deal.
Thank you, Bari. It's very interesting tying the success of their personal or professional vision to the outcome of the product or the service you're providing is always a great way to do that, to remind them why they're doing that. And sometimes it works better once you know what it is, but this is the part where until we know what they're looking for, it's very hard to make a decent presentation. And I think there has to be that question, that Q&A period with that sometimes we feel rushed. We have to go in there, we have to make our presentation, we have 5 minutes, I have to nail it. Once I realized it was more important that I listen and ask them, what are they using, which I already know because I've done my homework. Why are they using it, which I know because I've done my homework. I've learned through central service, I've learned through the operating room, I learned through their office. I know what my competitors' features and benefits are. I know what the competitive advantages and disadvantages are. What I want to understand is there something that we can offer that would take them and move them to the next level? What's that one thing they're not getting? Excuse me. The interesting thing is, I'm going to go back to price for a moment because, again, it's the go-to, but sometimes people are asking without even understanding why they're asking. I had a physician ask me, how come your implants, and this is when I was doing orthopedic hardware, I love this one, how come these screws cost so much? And I said, well, compared to what? That's like the best question. How come they cost so much? And I said, well, I can go to Home Depot and buy a stainless steel screw for 18 cents off the shelf. Why are your screws $18 each? And I said, boy, that's a great question, and you're in luck because I happen to know. And the funny part is when you talk about surgical quality stainless steel 316L or titanium, which is the standard, de facto standard nowadays for many of the implants, the machining, the testing, and this is the part people forget, it has to be implant quality materials. You're not going to be implanting the screws at Home Depot in a human body and expect them to come out and look pristine. I know when we explanted some implants after years, surgical quality instrumentation and implants look great. But here's the other thing, the liability factor involved. People forget about the cost, but here's the other thing. When you buy a screw at Home Depot, is the Home Depot person coming to your construction site and giving you technical support while you're putting that screw in? I doubt it. Is he doing an in-service for your team to make sure they know how to use all that equipment? I doubt it. Or are they on call 24/7 to provide support when you have a question or the staff has a question about the instrumentation? I doubt it. So the cost of the implant, it's not just the cost of the raw material, it's everything that stands behind it. And it's funny when you share that with people, all of a sudden they're like, okay, that makes sense because now you're comparing apples to apples. The other big thing that came up, again, in healthcare, and this comes up, I think virtually for anyone who's sold products into the hospital, is that I had a physician, and this is an objection that he brought up after the surgery. He said, my patient came in and they were very irate because, they had a bill in their hand and, your equipment, they were charged $10,000 for this particular device. I think it was a wrist fixator for a broken wrist. And I said, it's very interesting. I said, $10,000. I wish we were charging $10,000 for that item. I'd be, wealthy. I said, where did that price come from? He said, well, the patient came in waving their sheet, right? And it was really the EOB, the explanation of benefits. And I don't think we don't bill, we bill the hospital. But the funny part is physicians get told from the hospital, especially when they're putting equipment in, that the costs are too high, the operating costs, the anesthesia, the facilities. What they forget to say is how much they mark up some of that equipment. So the funny thing is we would sell a wrist fixator at the time, maybe $1,000. The hospital would mark it up 10 times as much. And if you think about the cost of a total hip, a total knee, spine implants, and again, I'm talking orthopedics because that was my background, the cost of these implants were minuscule compared to the overall cost of the procedure. And so when I showed him, I happened to have a catalog in my car. I took it, or the price list with me. I said, here it is. This is the price. He couldn't believe it because this goes back to sometimes people get told that this equipment's so expensive. we're not making money because the cost of the equipment or the quality of the equipment. They don't know. The other thing that's very interesting, and again, healthcare has gone through a lot of evolution over the last few years. When we're talking about the cost or objections, I think it's more important to understand, is it a smokescreen or is it a true objection? I don't like the material. I don't like the design of that product. I have better outcomes with my patients using this type of approach. I think, to be fair and honest, that's okay if they have a different opinion, if they have a different style. Not one company makes every product that's going to fit every patient. And depending on where you were trained, you need to know when to walk away from a particular sales presentation. Again, we want to win the war, not the battle. If you're selling multiple products to a physician, to a hospital, you need to pick and choose. And to Barry's point, building the relationship. This is a long term, right? When I called on some accounts, I called on them for 25 years. I had to be able to go in there and bring in a constant supply of equipment and latest technology, but more importantly, I had to provide service to them. So I think the objections, building that relationship, trust, respect, integrity, your credibility, your professionalism will go a long way to helping you really minimize the objections or get to the truth, the real objection of what's going on. And then from there, over time, you can figure out the best way to handle that. Price will always be an issue, no doubt about it. The availability, the company, there are some things that are out of your hand, but I think with a good question, good education, you can certainly overcome that. So I'm going to turn it over to Barry. We're going to wrap it up in a moment and prepare for our call next week. Barry, before we wrap that up, what else do you like to share with us?
In terms of overcoming objections, the point that I would like to reiterate is that consultative discussions are your best friend. If you just say, why don't you want to buy? Somebody is not just going to come out and give you the answer. If they don't trust you and you haven't built a relationship with them, they're not going to give away their secrets. So building that relationship to get to the understanding of sort of how they think and what makes them tick is going to inform the questions that you ask them to lead you to the consultative questioning that uncovers those hidden objections. It's not just as simple as saying, oh, come on, it's too expensive. What's the real reason? Nobody's going to tell you that. So overcoming objections really does go back to knowing your product, knowing your customer, and learning which questions to ask to lead you to the answers you need. So that's my quick wrap up on overcoming objections. And and hopefully next week we'll have some more great questions that we can answer. I'm looking forward to it, and hopefully you can all join us.
Thank you, Barry. And Barry thought she didn't have anything to contribute this call. She goes, I've never run into objections out in the field. But we all do, and it's kind of funny. And I always joke about if you're not running into objections, you're not out there really doing your job selling and offering that. And it is funny, the more you do this and the more comfortable you get answering objections, it's amazing how few objections you get because your presentations automatically get fine-tuned and you're really overcoming them. You're answering all the questions up front. So when it comes time to purchase, and again, this is a process, right? We can talk about sales and the steps and the process. Everyone has a slightly different process. But the objection part, if you do your homework, you can minimize that. We always know there's going to be a price issue. We always know there's going to be a problem with delivery, service, contracts, depending on your specialty. Do your homework, be prepared, and more importantly, practice, practice, practice. And that's the only way you're going to overcome the objections. And again, a lot of good literature. I got a couple good articles I'll share when we send this out and some references on overcoming objections, because I think it's it's one of these things where we think we know how to do it, and for the most part we do, but sometimes we don't get to do it the way we need to. But again, ongoing topic. So thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next week. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit about general calls. We've been getting a lot of feedback about networking, transitioning, using LinkedIn, and really how to maximize LinkedIn to grow your business. So we're going to, starting next week, kind of open this up to more Q&A to answer everyone's calls. So until then, have a great week. Have a good Veterans Day. Thank you to all of our veterans. Thank you for your service if we don't get to see you before then. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.